Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and a deeper appreciation of the exciting world of chess. I am your host, George Merijanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club, which meets every Wednesday evening in room C-199 of the McKay Campus School at Fitchburg State College. And with me is once again my trusty colleague and co-host, Martin Lane of Lunenburg, one of the strongest and most active chess players in North Central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Hello, George. Good to see you again.
It's always a pleasure seeing you, Marty. Marty, today we're going to focus our attention on one of America's living legends in chess, a player who has had an extraordinary career. And we were going to have him as a special guest tonight on our program for an hour-long special. Unfortunately, because of health reasons, he was unable to make it. We hope to have our guest, International Grandmaster Arthur Bisguier, appear on our program on a future show. What do you know about Grandmaster Arthur Bisguier?
Well, you know, until recently, I didn't really know very much about him. You know, he's certainly been a fixture on the American chess scene since the 1940s. He celebrates one of the reasons that we invited him onto our program.
Here's a nice
picture of him.
This picture was of him. It's from a book on the Chess Olympiad in 1960 in Leipzig, Germany. Right. This is Arthur Bisguier. He's 30 years old in this picture, and you say he's turning 80 years old this week.
In just 3 days.
In 3 days, October 8th. So this is a very young Arthur Bisguier, and he's played in 5 Olympiads. Here's another photo of Arthur at the board. He's played in 5 chess Olympiads. He's represented this country in 1952 in Helsinki, Finland. His first Olympiad was Helsinki. Here is one that played at the World Open in Philadelphia, a very popular tournament that Arthur enjoys playing in. And this was probably taken sometime in the 1990s. And again, he's one of the most active octogenarian, to be octogenarian.
He's still playing. He plays every week at the Metro West Club in Natick.
Here's another photo of him in tournament play, and he's a phenomenal player. You know, I've known him for many years. He's played in U.S. Opens. You know, he's won the U.S. Open.
Right, twice or 3 times.
He's actually won it 3 times.
And he tied for first 2 other times.
Yes,
right?
He won it actually in 1950 in Detroit the first time.
Right.
Then he won it in 1956. In Oklahoma City, and then in 1959 in Omaha, Nebraska. But you know what happened in 1957 in Cleveland, Ohio?
No.
He and Bobby Fischer tied for first place, and they drew their individual game in the tournament, but then they went to a tiebreak system to see whose opponents had better points, and they awarded the title to Bobby Fischer. But Arthur had the same score as Fischer, 10 points out of 12. Right. So again, he's won the title 3 times and actually tied for first in in 57. And there was one other tournament, U.S. Open, that he tied for first.
Right. And he's won dozens of other tournaments. National Open, I think he won. Lone Pine.
The very famous Lone Pine tournaments that were held in California. They were sponsored and organized by this chess philanthropist, multi-millionaire, Louis Statham. He won that in 1973. He was inducted into the U.S. Hall of Fame, Chess Hall of Fame, in 1994.
And a few years ago, he was officially designated the Dean of American Chess by the United States Chess Federation.
That's true. I think it was in 2005.
I think.
The United Chess Federation said, you know, Arthur, you are our Dean of American Chess. Because, weren't you telling me that he has played more people in this country than any other player?
Right. One of the references I came across said that more so than any other Grandmaster, he's played more people and more games of chess than any other. And he's had a tremendous career, not just in tournament chess, where he's played throughout his career. Many players, after they reach their peak, they retire from active competition, but he never did. And in addition to that, for a number of years during the 1970s and 80s, I think it was, you can correct me. He was actually in the employ of the United States Chess Federation to go around the country promoting chess, giving simultaneous exhibitions and lectures and entering competitions so that other people would enter those to help promote chess in this country. So he's been a major force in chess.
That is very true. I remember in the 1970s and also in the 1980s, he was hired by then the executive director of the U.S. Chess Federation, Ed Edmonds. He's a colonel, an Air Force colonel, retired, and he sent out Arthur to chess clubs, hospitals, youth centers, schools, to give lectures, simultaneous exhibitions. I mean, Arthur was our goodwill ambassador. Right. He promoted chess from coast to coast.
Right. Now, I never knew him. I mean, hopefully I'll meet him, but I haven't met him personally. I did see him at one of the tournaments or a couple of the tournaments that the Continental Chess Association has sponsored. I can't remember which ones. But he was there, and he gives so freely of his time. He would be in front of a demonstration board like this, and anybody could walk up to him, offer, show him their game, and he would put it up on the board, and he would critique it.
You know which tournament you're talking about? Is the Foxwoods Open?
That's the one
down in Connecticut.
Right, that one I saw him, but also I saw him up in Lowell when one of those tournaments up there.
Was it one of the? Was it a New England?
Like a Northeast quad.
Oh yes, right. There was a Northeast Spectacular. Yes, right.
Yeah, one of those. He was there, and also in Sturbridge, I think.
Well, you know why we're seeing more of Arthur in New England, because he used to live in Rock Hill, New York. I mean, right. He grew up in the Bronx. He was born in the Bronx, and he learned chess at the age of 5, but he and his wife, Carol, who's a retired lawyer, moved to Wellesley, Massachusetts, and they live with their daughter. Daughter and husband live actually in Wellesley. So Arthur, is a regular participant in the largest chess club, certainly in New England, and possibly in the country. It's the Metro West Chess Club in Natick, Massachusetts. It meets at the Senior Center in Natick, and Arthur plays there. And he keeps himself busy. I mean, he is quite a conversationalist. And again, I'm hopeful that we have him in a future program. We'll sit down with Arthur, ask him about his career.
And he's had a tremendously interesting life. He was born the same month as the stock market crashed in 1929.
Yes,
Grew up during the Depression and World War II. He learned the game, did we say, about at the age of 5 or so?
Right, his father was a mathematician. He learned from his father.
He went to Pace College in New York, became a computer programmer in the 1940s or early 50s.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
For IBM. You know, when computer technology, this is what I wanted to ask him about. What was that like? Because computer technology was in its infancy in those days. What must that have been like?
Exactly.
And he became the U.S. Junior Championship, went on to this other career.
Won it eventually, twice. The Junior Champion, he won at 1948, 49.
And then went on to the U.S. Open and U.S. Championship. Then at some point made that decision to become a full-time professional. I'd love to ask him about that decision and how that came about.
Well, we're going to hold these questions for Arthur.
These questions are coming up
when he comes, because he's a walking lexicon of chess knowledge and has stories to tell. He's played all the greats.
Including the one we're going to talk about today. So.
And the game we're going to present today, Marty, is a game that Arthur played against one of the top players of the world back when this game was played. It was played in 1965 at an international tournament in Zagreb, Yugoslavia. And Arthur's opponent was international grandmaster Bent Larsen of Denmark, one of the top players at that time, who reigned supreme. And this is a famous game. Right. Now, most of our viewers, I would say 99.9% of our viewers, have never seen this game, but we want to present it to show you the skill and the tactical ability of Arthur Bisguier. So in this tournament, Arthur has white. And how did he open the game, Marty?
Okay, in this game he takes the pawn on d2 and moves it to d4. Now, most of the other games that we've seen have opened e2 to e4, but d2 to d4 serves the same purpose. The pawn occupies a central square, opens up a diagonal for the dark squared bishop, opens up some space for the queen to move. It's a good opening move.
Okay. So Larsen, in response to d4, had choices. He could have played d5 as a good response. Also, knight f6 is also good. But what Larsen played was G6. He played the pawn on G7 to G6. And what is this?
Well,
is this okay?
It's called it's preparing a fianchetto when the bishop will go to the
I see. So a fianchetto or fianchetto is when you're placing a bishop along a long diagonal?
Right.
Okay.
And Larson was a real proponent of these kinds of openings. They used to be known as hyper-modern openings, I think.
Right.
And that's because the player doesn't actively go for occupying the center as you do with d4, but that bishop in the fianchetto or fianchetto position attacks the center from a distance, and that's kind of the philosophy of the hypermoderns. They're still fighting for the control, but from a distance.
From a distance. You know, back in the 1950s, this defense was made very popular by an Austrian Grandmaster, Karl Robach. Right. And, you know, he analyzed it in depth. And then it fell out of favor, and it didn't pop up again until the 1970s when British players started adopting this, and they coined the term, calling this the modern defense. Right. But you'll see references to both the Robach defense and now you see the modern defense. It's one and the same. Right. So what did Arthur Bisguier play on his second move against this G6?
He takes advantage of the fact that the center is unoccupied, and he takes his pawn on E2 and plays that to E4. So now he's got his two central pawns in the center of the board. He's going to occupy the center.
That's ideal. Boy, if
classic center,
the classic center, if you can do that, you can put two pawns in the center. Look at the squares you control. All right, so Larson continues with bishop G7. That was his purpose of playing G6, so he could play the bishop to G7.
Right.
All right, so now?
Well, the bishop occupies that diagonal, and it is attacking that D4 pawn, but the D4 pawn's protected by the queen, so there's no rush to protect it.
Yes.
Probably the most common move in this position is for white to develop his knight from B1 to C3, and that develops a knight, strengthens the position in the center. In this case, though, Arthur Bisguier goes... He's going to even seize more of the center. He takes the pawn on F2 and plays it to F4. Now he's got this row of pawns occupying the middle of the board. He's going to take it for all it's worth.
Okay. Well, now it's becoming very imposing, having three pawns in the center here. Now he could have, if I put the pawn back, could he have played this other pawn, the C pawn, to C4? Was that an option?
That was also an option. That works just as well.
Okay.
That simply moves the center, sort of center line of pawns over to the queen side.
All right.
This by playing to F4, he signals that he's going to be attacking on the king's side. Is what he's doing. Right. And partly, so oftentimes the one weakness of the fianchetto position, if you're going to attack it, is to try to advance a pawn to F5, and that kind of breaks up those pawns, and that comes into play later.
Okay. Can I go back to what you said about knight C3, which is a very logical response, developing a piece.
Right.
You know, this game he played against Larson was in 1965. 12 years later, Arthur Bisguier faced the same position against fellow American Grandmaster Bill Lombardi in the U.S. Open in Columbus, Ohio, and Arthur then played knight C3.
And that would have been the perfect question, why did he change?
Yes, why did he change?
Right.
And his answer probably would say, well, I'm flexible. Right. So he played F4.
Right.
So what Larson did in response to F4, well, he played D6. He plays D6, now opening up now for this white squared bishop, black's white squared bishop, to be able to come out. Can't come out to a good square, but at least it opens the avenue, the diagonal for that bishop.
So now that Bisguier has the three pawns, he needs to start getting pieces out. He could play that knight on B3, B1 to C3.
Yes.
But what he does, he takes the king's knight on G1 and plays that to F3, developing the knight, and it really continues that idea of an attack on the king's side. He keeps this in reserve, and that I think is a good idea in this case.
Well, Larson, in response, on his fourth move, plays knight on G8 to F6. So knight F6. And what this move does is attacks the pawn on E4. So now what does white do here?
Well, white needs to defend that pawn. Okay. And he could, at this point, perfectly reasonably play knight on B1 to C3. And this is a well-known standard position, known as the Austrian attack, I think.
Yes, it is. It's called the Austrian attack.
But what he does instead is he still keeps this knight back here, and he decides he's going to defend that pawn with his white squared bishop on f1. He plays that to d3, which now puts that bishop on the diagonal, because black is clearly going to castle on the king side. So instead of, he now makes a move that really accomplishes a lot. It puts a bishop on an important diagonal, allows him to castle on the next move. It's an excellent developing move in this position.
Well, what Larsen does is he castles.
Right.
It's time to castle.
Right.
So he castles, king 2 squares toward the rook, and the rook goes on the other side. We're castled.
And Bisguier does the same. He castles.
All right. So now how does black proceed? Larsen now must come up with a plan. And what he does on his turn, he plays the knight on b8. Instead of playing it to c6, which he could have done, with the idea possibly of playing the knight to b4 to attack the bishop, or possibly even playing e5 eventually, he plays knight on b8 to d7. Now, what do you think of this move? Is this okay?
Well, I think it's. I didn't like the knight to c6 as much because he can.
Yes. Yes, because on knight c6,
the threat is really sort of hollow because he can actually just he can negate the whole thing just that, and then where's the knight going to go? He's got no future over.
All right. Okay. All right. So the knight is on d7. So, the knight is on d7. Right. So what does Arthur Bisguier do here?
Okay. Now he's got a good solid center. He's got a very aggressive position. He's built up. His bishop is pointing down towards the king. He's got a knight over there. He's got a queen. He's got a rook. Everything is pointing down towards the king's position. So he's going to, now one of the things that black tries to do in this position is to play e5 and try to stop any advance by white. And that you can see that that's a move that's coming up
in fact,
really quickly.
Actually, that's his threat right now.
Right.
Yes.
And so what he takes, since it's his move, he's going to take advantage. He's going to play e5. He advances his pawn from e4 to e5, attacking the knight, attacking that pawn. So taking e5 away from black.
So he beats black to the punch.
Right.
Yeah. So he plays e5, attacks the knight. Now, Larsen could have exchanged your pawns, but he chose to retreat this knight on f6. He plays knight e8. So he retreats.
Yeah, and taking the pawn, if we just go back for a moment, taking the pawn.
If we had taken the pawn,
it only helps white. It doesn't accomplish anything.
Because what white would do is take back
with the f pawn. Now he's given up a center pawn for a sort of a flank pawn, I guess you would call it. Opens up the f file because the knight now still has to go.
Knight has to retreat somewhere.
So it doesn't accomplish anything.
No, but the important thing is white now gains this semi-open file. Yeah. Okay. So nothing is gained by taking. It's not advantageous. So he retreats. Knight e8 was the move played by Larsen on his 7th move. So what does Arthur do now?
Well, he takes a look at the position of the queen. He could develop pieces, but much more aggressive turns out to be a fairly simple move. He plays the queen from d1 to e1, putting it on this important file because he's looking over at these squares over here to help carry out his attack.
All right, so this is to shift the queen over to the king's side.
Right.
Okay. So what Larsen does, he'd like to actually dissolve these pawns in the center, so he hits with the c pawn. He plays c7 to c5.
Right.
So now he wants to really help just eliminate pawns here.
Well, yeah, this is what black, in a situation like this, the defending player, in this case black, needs to try to dissolve his opponent's pawns.
Okay.
And by doing exchanges, he can accomplish that.
All right, so what comes now?
Well, he's going to start his attack. He's going to play the pawn on f4 to f5.
Ooh, so now the advance...
striking at the king.
Okay, what Larsen does, and when he sees f5, he now takes e5. He captures here. Does he not?
Right.
D takes e5. Okay.
Well.
Yep. Now what does white do?
He's going after the king side. He's not too worried about that. He's going to take the pawn on f5 and take at g6, attacking this fianchettoed position.
All right. So Larsen now, what he does, he captures this pawn. He recaptures, but he doesn't capture with the f pawn because what would this do? This would actually leave these pawns isolated. Right now they're double, but they could be one could be eliminated. You capture toward the center, so you can keep these pawns connected. So he plays h takes g6. That's his move. That was his response there. All right, so now it's the 11th move coming up for white.
Right. Now white could capture the pawn on e5 because it's attacked by the queen, by the knight, and the pawn. It's only defended twice. He could take that pawn.
He could, yes.
But much more aggressive is to take this queen and play it to h4.
Okay.
Now he's got the queen on this open file coming right down up against the king.
All right. What Larsen does here, after queen h4, his e-pawn on f5, he captures. E takes d4. Now he's won his second pawn. He's 2 pawns ahead now.
Now he could have taken it with the other pawn,
yes,
but he wants to keep this square open for his knight.
Okay, so it vacates that square for the knight to come in. Okay, so black's 2 pawns ahead, but positionally it's not looking too good for him.
Right. So now Bisguier is now looking for ways to attack, ways to complicate the position. Now he develops his knight on his bishop rather on c1 to h6.
All right. So it looks like he wants to eliminate this dark squared bishop here by exchanging here. All right, so bishop h6. All right, so now Larsen has to make a decision. What he does, he has the possibility of there are 2 knights that can move to the f6 square. He chooses to move the knight on e8 to f6. He could have played this knight over here, which analysts who've looked at this game said was a better move. But he played the knight on e8 to f6. All right.
And the reason that he needs a knight on f6 is because he needs to cover that h7 square.
Right.
There's a eventual threat of
he's protecting the square right now.
Yeah, he needs to do that.
All right, so he plays that move, knight ef6.
Okay, so now Bisguier continues its attack. He plays the knight on f3 to g5.
All right, looks very strong. All right, now that he's moved the knight to g5, he's actually relinquished control of the e5 square, making it possible now for Larsen to play knight e5. So he's coming to knight e5. He's got an attack. This does attack the bishop on d3. It also has the possibility of bringing the knight on e5 to g4, which is protected by this knight, which in turn attacks the bishop. So we have a double threat. What does Arthur do in response to knight e5?
Well, one of the things in chess that you need to do, if there are pieces that are troubling you, you need to get them off the board.
Okay.
And what Bisguier does, he finds a really interesting set of combinations here. First of all, he's going to eliminate one of those knights by taking the rook on f1 and capturing rook take on f6, which at first glance looks like he's giving up a major piece, a rook for a minor piece, a knight. In terms of material, it looks like it might be a material sacrifice.
All right, so he's offering the rook. All right, now why in this position Larsen did not take this rook? He had 2 ways to take that rook. He could have taken the rook with the pawn. He could actually have taken with the pawn. E takes f6. But what is wrong with this? Is this a mistake to take the rook with the pawn?
Well, it leads to mate. He could simply play bishop take bishop.
Bishop takes g7 here, okay.
And it's mate on the next move with queen, no matter what.
If he recaptures, queen h7 is mate. All right. So that stops.
We can't do that.
So he cannot take with the pawn. All right. So this bishop is here. So the rook is here. How about if he takes the rook with the bishop? All right. So he takes bishop. He says, okay, I'll take your rook. I'll give you my rook.
Well, the key here is that he does not. That white Bisguier does not have to take the rook. He simply puts the bishop on to g7, and now he's threatening mate in 2 ways. And so no matter what happens, he has a checkmate.
Right. The mistake, this would be a mistake to take this.
Take it because
this bishop would eliminate the knight.
And the king gets away.
Gets away. So the idea, the key move here is bishop g7, and mate is unstoppable. It's coming either on, if he takes the bishop on h7, or if he takes the knight, it's coming on h8. All right. So this is a very pretty move. All right. If the bishop had taken the rook. So what Larsen does here, he realizes he can't take the rook with the bishop or the pawn, so he plays a very subtle defense. He plays bishop back to h8.
Right.
All right. So what's this all about?
Well, now you'd look and say, well, why not play bishop take rook and then threatening queen down to h7, thinking that it might lead to mate. But in fact, it doesn't.
All right.
The king does manage to get away at this point.
All right.
If you do that. So what Bisguier did is He's going to keep up the pressure and preserve his rook. He just retreated back to f1, maintaining all that pressure.
All right.
And keeping the situation, and now really forcing Larson to move somewhere.
All right. Well, now it gives Larson the chance to save his rook from being lost to the bishop. He now plays rook e8. And you realize this knight on e5 is also useful in defending this
square.
f7 pawn right here.
Yep.
All right, so the rook is here on e8. So rook e8 is his play. Okay. So well, now what does Arthur play?
Well, he plays the bishop down to f8.
Okay.
Threatening queen to h7, checkmate.
Well, what it would do, I mean, he's threatening to come here, check. Of course, the king could take.
But then queen takes bishop. Maybe.
Right, yes, all right. So what, after bishop, I like this bishop f8. So what Larson plays here is, he plays bishop f6. All right, now why does he play bishop f6? What is the purpose of that?
Well, because...
is he hoping for the check here?
Right, but then the king can take...
Yeah, here's the problem with that.
Right.
It's wrong for white now to play queen h7 here, because now the king will take here,
and the mating square
and the
is
bishop
defended.
now controls this. So there's no check here,
and the knight defends that.
And how about if the rook were to take on f6? Well, what would happen is the pawn e would take f6, and on any check here like this, the king escapes.
Right.
The king escapes. Right. So you see how subtle these defenses are. All right, so here's the position. The king is here. The bishop's on f8.
The other bishop.
The bishop's right here. And this bishop is back here. Okay, so this is the position, and it's a mistake. It would have been a mistake for Arthur to come down with the check.
So but what he does is he comes down and plays queen to h6.
Well, actually, wait, I'm sorry. So what does he do first?
Okay. Then he takes that defender away.
Okay.
He sacrifices it.
All right. So he plays rook takes. Now he is threatening. Okay. So now what Larson plays? He takes the rook. E takes f6. So now he's given himself it looks like an escape square if he takes the bishop and runs out this way. Right. So what does Arthur do here?
Well, now he plays queen to h6. Threatening mate here or here.
Right. And this was the key move. That is, it would have been wrong to come down immediately here.
Because he can take.
Because the king could take f8, and on this check here, the king skips out and gets away.
Right.
So timing is so important. All right. So in this position, the queen goes to h6. And in this position, now, some of our sources indicate that Larson resigned here. But actually, in most of the game databases we have found, the move that Larson played, supposedly, was rook takes f8.
Right.
And what did Arthur do now?
Well, then it leads simply to queen to h7, checkmate.
Okay. And this is how the game ended.
Right.
19 moves, and this was an extraordinary game.
It was extraordinary because the last 10 moves were practically forced. There was no way out. There was no improvement that Larson could have done after about the 8th move to get out of this. That was his last chance, was around the 8th move.
Now, I don't know whether our director Darren Dame actually has whether he showed the photo of the cover of Arthur's book, The Art of Bisguier. It's a very, comical. There it is. Arthur wrote his autobiography. This is a collection of games, that Arthur did. It actually came up with a second. He has a second volume of this. Mm-hmm. But this actually, I'm sure this game must be in this volume that was annotated by Arthur. Again, this is one book that I should get my hands on, and I'm sure I'd be interested in knowing how Arthur commented on this game that he played in 1965. Again, Arthur is an incredible person. You know, if he were here, there were so many questions to ask him. You know, when he won the U.S. Championship in 1954, and he was Fischer's second. You know the game we presented with Petrosian and Corsau, the last program? He was Fischer's second.
Right.
He helped Fischer.
We need to talk about that a different
Anyways, we're going to see our chess fans next time for another edition of Chess Chat. We'll present a very interesting game, a game we hope will instruct and entertain you. Martin and I love this game. We hope more people play this game, the greatest game of all. See you next time on Chess Chat.